I'm Dr. Connie. I'm your host of Mind Your Health podcast. I share my unique perspective both as a practitioner and a patient battling autoimmune condition for over 25 years because I had to figure things out on my own, and my education in my practical approach as a patient allows me to truly integrate it so that you can be whole and the burden of sick care is no longer your own burden to carry. And this is what we help you with in this podcast. Hi, this is Dr. Connie. As we approach Valentine's Day, it leads me to think a lot about relationships. And as I think about my relationship woes, I wish I would have known some things that I know today that I just didn't know before getting married. And there was just a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering that went into it. And so those of you who are nurturing a relationship, I thought it'd be helpful to have a shift in perspective and really own sort of our own emotions in a way to really nurture the relationship that you may be in the most effective and strategic way, to approach it with self-awareness, kindness and compassion and empathy, to really, really provide what your partner might need. Because there's always going to be differences. There's two people coming together. One is a woman in most cases and a man. And just by virtue of different sex, and we're talking about just conventional relationships, then I know there's crossovers now, woman to woman and men to men. And certainly there's that too, but there's always that role of more dominance, more testosterone, more estrogen. So there's always a female and male, yin and yang, right? So I want you guys to really think about it in that context. So it applies to any kind of couples that I may be talking about. So it's not isolated to just conventional relationships, right? But there is a female component and a male component, whatever role that you play in that relationship, right? So I want you to think about the influence of family dynamics, because I think about my first failed marriage, and I can tell you that I never really learned communication skills from my upbringing, my parents. Culturally, in Korea, my parents met and it was an arranged marriage for them. And so my mom had a lot of resentments and she had to sort of make it work with my dad. And she always talked about how she really didn't like this, she really didn't like that about my dad. There was just a lot of complaints there. But they did, despite their incompatibility accordingly. And it goes both ways. My dad would complain about my mom, and when my mom would complain to my dad. I was the child, youngest of four, listening to this from my parents. And I didn't know it then. But I know now that was dysfunctional in and of itself, because in my little mind, as they started to complain about each other in my 20s, I just didn't know what my role was. All I knew was I wanted to please my mom, I wanted to please my dad. And so I was an open ear, but I just didn't know that it was being conditioned in my little brain to really have dysfunctions and have a lot of confusions around communication, as well as what's appropriate and what's not to say with your child, and just be subject in the middle of that. So I don't think that that's really healthy. And the other thing that I want to really say is I've really witnessed a lot of married couples, and a lot of, especially a lot of women friends and patients that I've had, they almost think like they're not happy in the marriage, but it's sort of like they've sort of raised kids together and they were so busy that at the end, when they become empty nesters, they don't have anything common with their spouses. And so it's hard to come together. And by then, it's kind of too late for divorce as the kids are getting married. And so they stay together, but they become their own entity, so to speak, not a unit. So I think personally that it's important, if you're in your 20s or 30s thinking about marriage, wherever you are, or you've been married 30 years and now you're looking at each other trying to nurture this relationship, I just want you to keep certain things in mind, because number one thing is that your partner cannot provide happiness for you. Do not expect that person to fit your needs. It's the expectations that we bring with us and our self-centeredness in our insecurities. But if we can own that and be a little bit more self-aware, and that's why we practice yoga, to elevate our consciousness in a way where we become more self-aware. Because if we're not self-aware, we get stuck in thinking very, very hard ways and the way we were taught, which can be dysfunctional, but in our eyes, that way or the highway for most people. And I've met a lot of people like that. In fact, my family's that way. So I know that when I talk to my mom or my dad, there's not many things that I can change. They're going to see the world as they are and not as they are, not as the world is. Does that make sense? So they bring so much of their perspective, and it's all about that judgment. And they're always bickering at one another, and they're always like, my dad thinks he's right, my mom thinks she's right, and they always cross paths. And then their form of resolution is they'll never match the resolution. They turn their backs on each other, and then they keep their marriage. But I don't think it's something that's healthy. And I think a lot of couples sort of struggle through this. A better methodology is to really know thyself, know and really think about your position and your ownership in the conflicts that may take place in a relationship. I'm going to tell you a story. In 2024 or in 2014, I got divorced. And that was the hardest divorce ever because I had two young boys under 10. And I knew that when I got divorced, I didn't know what tomorrow would be. I had a good financial thing going with my ex, and it was everything. And in fact, that was the ammo that he used to say, it's so much better together financially than to separate and to kind of throw away all that we've built. But for me, it became so much, there was so much conflict going on, and I had two little boys, and I was so worried that my two boys would grow up looking at this dysfunction, thinking that the way my ex used to treat me was okay, to treat a woman that way. And so I felt like I was raising boys and it was an injustice to my boys, and that was irresponsible if I stayed. So instead of thinking it's the bed I made, I better stay in it and sacrifice myself, I decided to choose myself and show strength and say, I'm going to cut ties, I'm going to get a divorce. And then my family thought I was crazy, my ex thought I was crazy, and my kids didn't know the difference of what was going to happen. But fast forward 10 years later, me and my spouse that I've been with for since that time, approaching 10 years now, we have a relationship that is really healthy because I've learned that communication was a very difficult thing. And I never owned it because I used to always fight and I always blame my ex for not being able to communicate. When in fact, if you're in any relationship, it takes two to tango. So you have to own your own self in the relationship. It's almost like you're shoulder to shoulder, you're not face to face, expecting the other person to provide you with happiness. Because the dysfunctions come when we try to control one another with manipulation and words to hurt each other, to get them to do what we want. And if they don't, then we just bicker and we just fight and we don't know how to come to terms with it, right? We're looking at each other for the other people to meet our needs. And that's not how relationships work. It's shoulder to shoulder, we're both going forward. We're two individual people with the utmost respect. And unless I respect what my spouse wants, and I respect his happiness, and I may not like what he likes, and he may not like what I like, but we kind of come to a place where I do my own thing without him in the things that he doesn't like to do. I allow him space to do the things he wants to do without me having a say about what he wants. But I just want my spouse to be happy, and my spouse wants nothing more than me to be happy. We don't try to own each other. We don't try to say anything with each other. we do support each other in parenting. We support each other in, all things related to relationships, all things related to our living relationship. And if I have an issue where, I feel like I'm doing a little bit too much, I might vocalize it in a way where he can really understand where I'm coming from. So communication, communication, communication. I say this to say, at the onset of my relationship, coming out of my divorce with 2 little boys in tow, I was very insecure. And I remember picking fights with my, current spouse just out of no reason, because that's what I was used to with my ex. And with my new spouse, he's so understanding. He is so open. He doesn't try to control me in any way. He just loves me unconditionally. He allows space for me. He just lets me be me. And I wasn't used to that. I was used to somebody always trying to manipulate what I did, always being in my business, telling me how I can be doing better, how I can meet his needs better. You see what I mean? And that was causing a lot of stress in my life I didn't know. And then when I was married, I used to feel really, really bad about myself because I felt like I wasn't a good enough wife, good enough mom, because there was a lot of judgments coming towards me because I really loved my work and I needed my own space. And I'm one of those women, I just need independence. And that's really important to me. I get very claustrophobic if somebody tries to control me. And I really need to have a say in what I want to do. And I don't want anybody dictating what I can or cannot do. And I had a lot of that in my marriage, but today I don't anymore. And so to getting used to that, I used to pick fights. I'm like, is this right? Is this right? Is he going to leave me? Is he going to leave me? I can't be this happy. So I would pick fights out of my own insecurity. And there's a lot of things that I had to catch, and he had to really be patient with me when I did pick the fight because he didn't know where it was coming from. But it was coming from dysfunction. It wasn't until I was able to bring awareness to myself and really own it, but it required me to, swallow my pride and to accept these aspects of myself that my current spouse was telling me in a way that I understood. At first, there was a lot of struggle going back and forth. He didn't understand the dysfunctional patterns. He didn't want that in his life. And so we would just always come, and then he would ask me the questions. The conflict was unnecessary, but I was picking the fights because without the fights, I felt insecure. And then my nervous system would ask for it because that's where it was. Like I was highly anxious, highly fearful. And then, every other day I was fighting with my ex. And then today, I didn't have that with my current spouse. So I felt like if there's no fight, there's no communication, even though everything was good. And so it took many years of this and me sabotaging the relationships in this way to learn where he was, for me to gain my security in this relationship, because I realized how insecure I was. But before this relationship, I didn't know I was this insecure. I hope this is making sense. I brought all that baggage, emotional baggage into the relationship. So that brings me to this next point to say, if you have emotional baggage, I want you to own it. Because your current spouse cannot meet that emotional baggage without you explaining exactly what that is. Speak about it, let him know what you tend to do, but this requires you to do the work and evolve enough outside of the relationship to really protect the relationship from all the drama that can come and the dysfunctions that you may be producing unnecessarily, and really understand the dysfunctional patterns and conditioning that you received in your own upbringing to understand this. And really if you're a young couple thinking about parenting, really thinking about your values, what's really important to you, understanding that your values and your spouse's values, it doesn't have to line up exactly, but as long as you respect each other's values and it's something that you guys can work with, only you can determine what that is. Then and only then do you have kids together, knowing that you guys can work on the values in your ability to parent, because at some point when you parent, you're going to see patterns arise in your own behavior, in your parenting, that you've seen over and over in your parents' dysfunctions. And I brought that on, and my ex didn't see it, but my current spouse caught me in action, repeating the same thing that I complained about, which is all about emotional warfare. And I was doing that to my then 10-year-old boy. My ex had to put a stop to it, call me out on it with respect, without negatively affecting me, just outside of my kids watching. He had to pull me aside and really get honest with me and tell me the truth. It was really hard for me to hear at that time because I took everything so personally. Because again, I was very defensive. When we become defensive, I want you to sit with, why am I becoming defensive? Because then that comes from your insecurities about you. So when somebody gives you that constructive feedback, I realized my spouse didn't have anything to gain. In fact, he said, I have only you that I care about. My only dog in the fight is you, and you're the most important. I want to preserve your sanity, and so I want to tell you what I'm seeing. Are you open to hearing it? So I had to say, yes, tell me. And he said, do you know that you're sounding like your own mom? You're using emotional warfare on your child, and that's going to have lasting trauma on my son. And when he said it, I broke out in tears, and I realized what I've done. And I felt like, oh my gosh, that was repeating me. And that's all I learned to do, to manipulate the situation. In that case, it was my older son. And then I was using him to get back and use the only pattern and the dysfunction I know how. And it hasn't happened since. And my son knows that now, right after that happened, my now spouse, had to talk to my son about that so that he can understand that I'm only a parent doing my best, and then called him out on the disrespect and how he played into this drama. And then I now knew what I did wrong. And we were able to have this open communication from that point on with my 10-year-old. And today he is 20 years old, and I kid you not, that boy has the ability to text me the most thoughtful things, and I don't have any control on him, and I don't try to. I haven't tried to manipulate him in a way to do what I want him to do. I'm always listening to what he's wanting, even though I don't agree with it. I think it's important for us as parents to allow our kids to make their own mistakes and do the things, as opposed to me. I was always criticized. My parents always made me second guess what I was doing. And my parents are very, very old school, and it's only what they know. They're not bad people, they're very great parents, but there was a lot of lack of freedom in my own ability to make the choices. But I realized today that and that too I need to own, to make sure, because I was so insecure, I didn't know, and I was so conditioned by my mom and dad that I didn't know. And the more work that I did on myself, the more I was able to see, and then see the conflicts kind of being played out that was repeating the patterns that I learned in my own childhood. So really looking at your influence of your family dynamics, and then dysfunctional patterns that you might have learned along the way, and being really honest with it. And then understanding there's always an emotional baggage that you bring to the table into the relationship, and you need to own it before you get defensive. And then making sure that you nurture and love the relationship that you're in. And you do that by self-reflecting and healing your own traumas of your past. Do not bring it into this relationship. Be open about what you're experiencing, what you're feeling with the other person, and the way you talk matters too. There's a way you talk, and that makes a huge difference in saying, you always have to do this, and you always do that. And like, it's almost like you pointing the finger at the other person. Rather than that, you want to own your feelings. without assuming anything. You want to say, when you do that, babe, I feel like this, and this. When you say that, babe, I feel this, and this. That softens the blow. You're owning your own feelings, and you're having an open dialogue with that other person without the other person trying to be defensive back to you. So I want you to really understand, and I didn't know that I didn't have the words and the capability to speak it in this way, to own my own emotions, because one thing I didn't learn in my household is to feel my emotions. Even to this day, if there's anything negative going on, my parents looked the other way. Only the positive things we look. And when we get together as a family, we always wanted to talk about the good. If there's anything bad we're experiencing, we look the other way. When I had the kidney transplant, they looked the other way. That's all they know how to cope. And to me, that's emotional maturity. We never learned the emotional maturity because we never learned to feel the emotions. Because having emotions was shameful. And when you cry, it wasn't a good thing. So I want you to really understand that. So self-reflection and healing is your responsibility, and I want you to educate yourself, right? You guys don't know effective communication skills and relationship skills. We don't learn this in the home unless you had the most perfect parents, and that's too far and few in between, although I've seen many of them, right? So educate yourself and really look at what things you want to take away, what things you do not want to pick up, right? Really being true to yourself and being honest is key. And then really take the time to, like I said, feel your feelings, choose the words wisely as to not affect the other person. Don't point the finger, but own your feelings. Communication skills. Be vulnerable with the person you love. Because if you're not vulnerable with them and really be honest about how you feel, they're never going to understand. And this brings up so much more in the relationship. It enriches it and it grows it. And then that person starts to respect it. And then you guys are able to sort of tread lightly and respect each other's sensitivities and nurture that instead of attacking it to your own benefit, because that can happen too. And that's happened in my past relationships. As for the conflict resolution, there's no conflict that cannot be resolved. A lot of the times it's because our ego is boosted and we want to be right and we want to make the other person wrong. It's not about right or wrong. It's about how much do you want to invest in this to make it right. Because at the end of the day, you really have to understand that if you want to make this relationship work, you have to invest the time and the energy to allow for the other person and give them space to be them, even if you don't like it. And then allow yourself next to that person and then just stand shoulder to shoulder looking forward together, because we do life forward, right? We don't do it looking at each other expecting others to meet our needs. That's what most couples do. But no, couples enhance each other's life when we stand shoulder to shoulder looking forward at where we want to go. We need empathy and understanding in the perspective. Walk in the shoes of the other person, always regarding the other person. And really, I didn't learn how to be considerate towards other people well into my 40s. I didn't learn it in my household. My household, sad to say, but I think my household is very narcissistic. I have a very narcissistic parents. I have narcissistic siblings. That's all I know. I used to be very narcissistic. I didn't know anything else. As long as I'm okay. It's like my perspective or the highway. I didn't know all of this because that's the household I grew up in. It wasn't until I picked up yoga and I started to evolve and then studied Christianity and read all the books to enhance my relationships and then my current relationship, and then realized what exactly I wanted. And then I was met with this raw transparency, honesty, and authenticity in a way where I started to really look at my role in everything. So empathy and understanding towards myself first, so that I can understand the other person and really learn to consider other person. And that's not possible, which brings me to this next point, is self-love. We really are looking for other person to meet our needs because we lack so much self-love. And that's really where the problem is. For as long as I've been doing clinical practice, it's the self-love that's lacking. I have had many employees, many people from different walks of life that I try to work with. And the one thing that sabotages any success is self-love, lack of thereof. Because self-love, if it's not there, you become highly insecure, you become highly narcissistic, and you become all about self-centered, and it's all about defensiveness. You don't want to learn anything, you want to make everybody else wrong, and then you're not taking constructive feedback because you take everything so personally because you lack the self-love. When you have self-love, you want to do better. And so when you cure it and you realize that your actions had negative impacts on other people, you start to think about, okay, this had this impact on other person. If that person is somebody who I care about, I want to change how I show up in this relationship. So I learn to tread lightly, speak softly, and not get so defensive. Ask questions to meet the needs of the other person so that I can better communicate. Using the words, carefully thinking about what words that I use, and then so that I can kind of cultivate this growth in my relationship. It's not just love relationships. I've had to do that with my employees, the people that I work with my clients, with everybody that I deal with in my life, social, professional, and otherwise, right? So keep that in mind, because this leads me to another concept called the love language, right? The concept of the 5 love languages was developed by Gary Chapman, which is a relationship counselor, right? There's 5 love languages, and it's helpful to know. It's also in the book, 5 love languages, and it's the 5 love languages are words of affirmation. It's those people that need constant affirmations from the other person to know what the other person is thinking. Second is acts of service, right? You want to do more for them. You might be cooking for them, you might be cleaning for them, you might be doing things for them, taking out the trash, doing the dishes, or whatever the other person might enjoy, right? And then the third thing is receiving gifts, buying them gifts. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of us enjoy getting gifts, right? And then the 4th love language is quality time. It doesn't matter what you do, it's doing things together. Even if you don't enjoy it, I watch sometimes Georgia games because my spouse loves it. And it's, that's what we do, college football. And then, when there is NFL, what do you call that? What's that? Super Bowl. Super Bowl is not something, and football is not something that I enjoy, but because my spouse loves it, you know what I do? Acts of service is my love language. So I do chili, I do everything to hype up the night to make sure that my spouse is happy and he can watch football with me by his side, and we're watching football. Even though I may not be enjoying it. I'm not checking computers. I respect it, and I'm just there for him as much as I can, right? That's quality time. And then some people need physical touch. Just nurturing, always holding hands. That's another love language of mine. So my spouse always holds out his hand. We're always touching each other, holding hands when we're watching together. At the movies, we're touching each other. Walking, we're holding hands. We do things like that because we just know that it's important for the other person. I think it's really, really important to find out what your spouse might be loving, and then doing those things not because you don't want to do it, but if you regard the other person and you know that that's the person, you have to invest the energy and the time and pull yourself out of that narcissistic tendencies, especially if you're dating later in life. I want you to understand, we're so set in our ways, it's hard to give and take, but all the more love opens up doors for you to really explore different aspects, and love is blinding, so you can do things for this person, but invest in the time even when the heat of love dies down to where the relationship now becomes second nature. That's when you really continue to nurture the relationship, to cultivate this I don't know, lifelong friendship where you kind of know each other and you regard and consider each other with empathy and compassion. No matter what they do, you've got their back and you know they've got your back. And those are the relationships that last a lifetime. And it takes a lot of work is all I want to emphasize. But first and foremost, you must work on yourself. And remember, you guys are coming together shoulder to shoulder, not expecting each other to meet your needs, but you're enhancing yourselves to amplify who you are, who you truly are. That you don't have to change who you are to be loved by that other person. If that's it, the relationship is not going to last long. You're going to really betray yourself in this relationship. It's not the healthiest. So these are all things that I want you to consider as we go into Valentine's Day. So there's going to be a workshop at Functional Yoga Medicine that I'll be leading. I want to do this to help couples to enhance, or new couples to enhance their relationships and learn more about each other and about the relationship dynamics enough so that you guys can enhance what you've got going on. Because in this world of increased divorces and conflicts, we need to do better with communication. And with all the social media feeds and then the technological advancements, this communication is lacking because we're now meeting people online and there's so much being missed. And, you know, it's time to come back to who we were truly meant to be, human beings with deeper feelings and understanding ourselves and loving ourselves at the core. And that's what I want to promote in this workshop, all about nurturing your relationship and enhancing who you are in the relationship so that you can flourish together for a lifetime. So join me there and click the link for more, and I'll see you guys all in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Mind Your Health podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, we would so much love it and appreciate it if you share it with someone who could benefit as well as to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else where podcasts are found. And leave us a review. We would be so grateful, and it helps us to reach more people just like you, so you can become more empowered to enjoy longevity and health. You can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Dr. Connie Chung. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast for a new episode every single week. Thank you again.